When we hear about Iran and Israel in the news, most of the time it's headlines, dramatic, sensational, and usually lacking context. Maybe it's a mysterious explosion at a weapons depot in Syria. Maybe it's a drone strike on an Iranian convoy. Or perhaps it's a terrorist rocket attack blamed on a militia in Lebanon. But what's constantly left out from mainstream discussions is the reality that these aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a much larger, carefully orchestrated shadow conflict, a proxy war being waged not directly between Iran and Israel on their own soil, but through other nations, through other peoples, and in ways invisible to most of us. This quiet war is happening daily in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and even reaching as far as Africa. These places have become the invisible chessboard for Iran and Israel. Iran backs a network of militias and political groups, most notably Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shiite militias in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. Israel, in response, carries out targeted airstrikes, cyber operations, and intelligence missions, often so deep in foreign territories that local populations don't even know who hit them or why. But the people suffer just the same. Take Syria, for example. Since the start of its civil war, Syria has become a playground for Iranian military influence. Iran sends money, fighters, and weapons to prop up Bashar al-Assad's regime and to establish a permanent foothold near Israel's borders, a red line for Israeli defense policy. In response, Israel has launched hundreds of airstrikes, not on Syria itself, but on what it calls Iranian entrenchment. Weapons convoys, missile factories, intelligence units, it's all targeted, often with deadly precision. But here's what you rarely hear on the news. These operations may kill an Iranian officer or two, but they also reduce neighborhoods to rubble, displace already traumatized families, and send entire regions deeper into chaos. We've essentially normalized a guerrilla war between two regional superpowers, but because it doesn't erupt on Tel Aviv's skyline or directly hit Tehran's streets, it gets pushed into the margins of coverage. We're told it's just part of Middle East instability, as if that term explains the suffering. In reality, Iran and Israel are choosing to fight through proxies so that they can avoid full-scale war themselves. It's a cold, calculated strategy, and it's being paid for, not by Tehran or Jerusalem's elite circles, but by civilians far removed from the decision-making room. Why do they fight this way? Because proxy wars carry plausible deniability. Iran can claim it isn't directly involved when Hezbollah fires rockets from Lebanon. Israel can claim it's responding to a terrorist threat without declaring a formal war. This allows both countries to act with a level of impunity, avoiding the international backlash that would come from a direct confrontation. It's the same game major powers have played for decades. We saw it in the Cold War. We've seen it in Africa, and now we're watching it unfold across the Middle East. But here's the catch. This proxy warfare isn't invisible because it's hidden. It's invisible because we've stopped looking. The media seldom frames these events as part of a coordinated war. Instead, it presents each attack, each explosion, as a one-off event, random acts of violence separated from each other. There's little effort to connect the dots, to tell the full story of a regional chess match that has already claimed thousands of lives indirectly. It's also telling how the narrative gets filtered depending on who's involved. Israeli drone strikes are often portrayed as defensive, while Iran's involvement is labeled as destabilizing. But when both sides are killing by proxy, disrupting sovereign nations, and manipulating foreign groups to serve their own relevance and reach, it's not a matter of who's right, it's a matter of who's invisible, and tragically, the more invisible the victims, the more easily the war continues. You might not hear their voices, but in a refugee camp in southern Lebanon, a child grows up next to shrapnel. In Damascus, a family rebuilds their house for the third time, unsure if another airstrike is coming. In Iraq, a soldier dies in a roadside blast, part of a war he never signed up for. And in each of these tragedies, if you dig deep enough, you'll find fingerprints. Here, Anne's, Israel's, and the global community's silence stamped on the bomb fragments. This isn't about taking sides, it's about seeing the whole board. It's about recognizing how easily war can hide when it's fought in someone else's country, when it kills someone else's family, and when someone else carries the weight of a conflict that was never theirs to begin with. Because if we don't start paying attention to the proxy wars, they will eventually become direct wars. And by then, it may already be too late. If we really want to understand this invisible war, the Iran-Israel Proxy War that isn't making the front page, we have to trace not just the bullets and bombs, but the systems that fuel them. This war doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's financed, resourced, and sustained through intricate webs of money, weapons transfers, black market deals, and political favors crisscrossing the globe. It's not just armies and militias at work here. It's banks, oil tankers, and secret flights delivering crates of guns under the cover of darkness. And what's crucial to understand is that this shadow economy of war is not only hidden from most people, it's often protected by the very states that claim to want peace. Iran, isolated by international sanctions for decades, has become a master of covert financing. Despite economic pressure, it continues to pour resources into Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and militias across Iraq and Syria. How? It's not just about ideology, it's about infrastructure. Iran uses a network of front companies, humanitarian organizations, currency swaps, and oil shipments to fund its allies. Oil, in particular, becomes a form of silent currency. Tankers turn off transponders mid-sea, changing flags and routes to get Iranian crude to buyers, especially in China. The profits made don't go into schools or hospitals at home. They end up purchasing rockets, surveillance drones, and explosives, many deployed outside of Iran's own borders. On the other side, Israel isn't just reacting defensively, despite what much of the Western media suggests. The Israeli military machine is supported by one of the world's most advanced and well-funded defense industries. Backed strongly by the United States, Israel receives roughly $8 billion a year in military aid under current agreements. That's taxpayer dollars from one of the world's most powerful nations, essentially subsidizing a regional shadow war. These funds help maintain Israel's Iron Dome system, sophisticated missile technologies, intelligence capabilities, and its long reach across borders with airstrikes and espionage missions deep into Iranian-affiliated territories. The weapons don't stop with state actors. Iran supplies Hezbollah and other proxy groups with guided missiles, drones, and small arms. Some of the missiles are so advanced they're capable of hitting major Israeli cities from across borders, escalating the stakes of every skirmish. Israel, in turn, arms rebel groups, and launches cyberattacks like the infamous Stuxnet virus, which targeted Iran's nuclear infrastructure. These are not simple tit-for-tat actions. They're part of a prolonged, well-resourced war being played out by machines and proxies. But in American and European headlines, they're often filed under regional instability or terrorist response operations, reducing decades of chess moves into generic terms that conveniently gloss over the deeper support systems enabling them. And let's not forget the private actors, the defense contractors, weapons manufacturers, and intelligence consultants, all of whom benefit from an ongoing state of tension. For them, a prolonged proxy war is good business. Every new skirmish, every fresh threat, every territory in flux becomes a new opportunity for billions in contracts, development deals, and weapons testing. When you watch how the war flows, you start to see that profit is not separate from policy. It is policy. This is also where oil and influence tie everything together. Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, no fans of Iran's Shiite regime, have aligned quietly with Israel both economically and strategically to push back on Iranian influence. It's not formal, at least not always, but it's happening in intelligence sharing, in diplomatic back channels, and in quiet arms agreements. Meanwhile, countries like Russia and China have sidled up closer to Iran, offering economic lifelines in exchange for military access and regional leverage. So what looks like a local or regional proxy war is actually a key fault line in a much larger global contest for control over resources, markets, and ideology. But when was the last time you heard a mainstream anchor map out this structure of incentives and trades? When does anyone connect the oil barrels to the missile strikes, or ask how government aid packages translate into arms deals on the battlefield? Rarely, because doing so would mean acknowledging that state actors, democracies included, are complicit. It would mean facing the uncomfortable truth that many of these systems are designed to perpetuate violence, not prevent it. Complexity is often ignored in favor of narratives that are simple, marketable, and easy to digest. And the cost of that simplicity is understanding. What's more, these financial routes are managed deliberately to remain opaque. Bank transfers occur using coded subsidiaries. Money gets funneled through Middle Eastern and Asian intermediaries. Weapons shipments are routed through failing states where oversight is minimal, and all of it is coded with just enough plausible deniability to keep the surface looking clean. But beneath it all, it's corruption, it's blood money, it's a global apparatus that keeps the war humming whether the cameras are rolling or not. So when you see a bombing in Baghdad, or a damaged tanker in the Gulf, or another night of rocket fire over Gaza or southern Lebanon, understand that what you're witnessing isn't just a local tragedy. It's the end result of decisions made in boardrooms, think tanks, and military alliances, driven by money, power, and influence. It's not about spontaneous violence, it's about structured war, invisible only because we've been trained not to see it. And that's exactly how it continues. It's strange, isn't it? We live in a time when access to information is broader than ever before. Social media streams from every corner of the planet. Thousands of articles are published daily, and breaking news notifications light up our phones around the clock. And yet, somehow, we're still blind to the full picture, especially when it comes to the Iran-Israel Proxy War. The bigger question isn't whether the truth is out there. It's why so little of it makes it into what most people actually see, read, or hear. Why is a conflict of such magnitude, involving covert operations, state-sponsored militias, billion-dollar weapon flows, and regional destabilization, barely registering in mainstream media narratives? The answer isn't simple, but it's disturbingly effective. See, most mainstream media today isn't about digging deep or building understanding. It's about packaging conflict into something digestible, easy to fit between commercials, quick to circulate, and safe enough not to upset core audiences. It's headline warfare where the nuance dies in the first sentence. So instead of a deep dive into how Iranian-backed militias are shifting power balances in Iraq, or how Israeli intelligence strikes are rewriting the rules of engagement in Syria, you get a 45-second segment titled Clash Erupts in Middle East. That's it. Dramatic visuals, a few official sound bites, and then on to weather and sport. This kind of surface-level reporting isn't always malicious, but it's incredibly damaging. It creates the illusion of awareness without giving people the information they actually need to understand what's happening. Iran becomes a caricature of terrorism. Israel becomes the perpetual defender. The people living in the war zones, those caught under the drones, fleeing the bombed hospitals, burying loved ones, don't make the cut. Their stories are too complicated, too specific, too uncomfortable. Instead, we get broad strokes, moral simplicity, and a narrative that fits within the West's familiar framework of good versus evil. So, let's get real. Why isn't this proxy war covered the way it should be? For one, many of its key flashpoints take place in areas where journalists struggle to gain access, either because they're too dangerous, or because governments clamp down on information to control the narrative. Try reporting openly from southern Lebanon when Hezbollah controls the bloc. Try uncovering clandestine Israeli strikes in Syria's outskirts where access is sealed off and allies look the other way. Journalists face genuine risk in these areas, and when safety is on the line, stories get overlooked. Or worse, outsourced to official military communiques that offer only one version of the truth. But safety isn't the only issue. Editorial control plays a massive role. News outlets, especially large corporate ones, have stakeholders, advertisers, political orientations, and national interests. It's no coincidence that media backed by Western institutions tends to mirror the foreign policy narrative of those same institutions. Iran, long demonized by U.S. foreign policy, is easily cast as the antagonist. Israel, viewed as a key Western ally, is more often framed as a nation simply defending itself, even when it crosses international borders or violates sovereign airspace. The deeper question of how both sides weaponize proxies and prop up war economies gets pushed aside because it doesn't line up cleanly with a story of hero and villain. And when independent outlets or investigative journalists try to dig deeper, they often hit a second wall: the audience. The truth is, most people have short attention spans, not out of malice, but because of the overwhelming pace of content in our world. It's easier to click on outrage than to sit with complexity. Why watch an 8-minute report on how Iranian oil revenues fund regional militias when you can scroll past it in favor of a trending celebrity scandal? Attention is a currency, and conflict stories that require reflection don't always pay well in viewer ratings or ad dollars. Still, the media asterisk does asterisk show us some things, but what it decides to show is crucial. When a rocket hits Israeli soil, it makes international headlines almost instantly. It should. That's terrifying. That's news. But when an Israeli strike hits a convoy in Syria, even if it kills operatives tied to Iran, the coverage is minimal if it appears at all. When Hezbollah escalates with new air defense systems supplied by Iran, it's quietly absorbed by niche analysts. But let one headline scream Iran threatens Israel, and it's everywhere. Inconsistencies like these don't just skew how we view the players. They shape public opinion, foreign policy support, and ultimately, global action or inaction. This curated silence matters because it allows the war to remain distant, abstract, and unchallenged. The people funding it never have to answer to public scrutiny. The governments enabling it operate under the radar. And the war machines keep running precisely because most eyes are turned away. You can't protest what you don't know. You can't advocate for the displaced if you've never seen their stories. You can't question your country's support for shadow operations if no one tells you they're happening. So here we are oversaturated with information but starved of insight. We have access to the outlines but not the substance. And that's not just a journalistic failure, it's a moral one. Because what we choose to see and what we're shown says more about us than about the war itself. By now, we've talked about a war that isn't officially declared but is undeniably raging. A war funded by shadow economies, fought by proxies, and largely ignored by the press. But all of this leads to a bigger question, one we can't afford to leave unanswered. Why does this matter? Why should people beyond the Middle East, beyond the political class and the intelligence community, care about a conflict fought in the shadows between two nations on opposite sides of a bitter ideological divide? The answer is simple, but it cuts deep. Because wars like this, though distant and silent, are shaping the future of the world we all live in. The Iran-Israel Proxy War isn't just a regional drama. It's a globally consequential fault line. It's a lens through which we can begin to understand how modern wars are fought, and why so many civilians keep paying the highest price. It shows us how national agendas are pursued outside legal frameworks, how powerful countries reshape the borders and lives of weaker ones without ever setting foot in a formal battlefield. This war stretches well beyond the actual missile strikes and drone footage. It spills into energy markets, trade routes, refugee flows, and even the algorithm-driven content you consume on your phone each day. Every escalation pushes the region closer to a humanitarian tipping point, and the ripple effects don't stop at national borders. Let's start with refugees. Every airstrike in Syria that targets a suspected Iranian weapons depot near a civilian area creates new waves of displacement. Entire families forced to flee their homes not once, but over and over again. These people often end up in neighboring countries barely equipped to handle the influx, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, or risk everything attempting to reach Europe. And when they arrive, exhausted and traumatized, they're met with political backlash, rising xenophobia, and accusations of being part of someone else's war. But they're not part of it. They're victims of it. Their lives have become collateral in a slow, grinding conflict most of the world has barely registered. Or take Yemen, already one of the worst humanitarian crises of our time. It's not just a civil war. It's also a proxy front. Iran supports the Houthis. Meanwhile, a Saudi-led coalition, quietly supported by allies of Israel, pushes back. The lines of loyalty and hostility, once national, have now become proxy-based. The war in Yemen isn't just about Yemen anymore. It's about strategic influence stretching from the Mediterranean to the Arabian Sea, and the children starving in Tays or dying of preventable diseases aren't statistics. They're warnings. Then there's energy. Any major tension between Iran and Israel rattles global oil markets. Just the threat of retaliation, say, after an Israeli airstrike deep in Iran, or after an Iranian-backed militia targets a U.S. base, can send prices surging. That affects fuel costs around the world, from South America to Europe, to the pumps in American suburbs. So, while the war may seem distant, your energy bills, the price of groceries, and even your local economy might be tied up in a conflict you were never told much about. And if all of that feels too abstract, let's bring it closer still. Think about what kind of international precedent this sets. When powerful countries carry out strikes across multiple borders with minimal accountability, when proxy groups operate above the law with foreign funding, when war can be fought without public oversight, what example does that offer to emerging nations? What becomes normalized isn't just conflict, but the idea that rules don't matter, that sovereignty is secondary to strategy, and that human lives are something negotiable. But there's something else at stake here. Moral clarity. The more we keep this kind of war hidden or dismissed, the more we begin to lose a sense of ethical orientation. Think about it. If a drone strike kills combatants and civilians alike in a remote part of Syria, but no footage is released and no headlines are written, did it really happen for those of us watching from afar? And if it doesn't feel real, doesn't that make future strikes easier to justify? We are slowly being desensitized to violence through omission. When war becomes just background noise, we stop asking the dangerous questions. Who made the decision to target that convoy? Who supplied the weapons used by that militia? Who profits from the chaos? And perhaps most importantly, who pays the price for our silence? The truth is, part of the reason these proxy conflicts persist is because the public isn't demanding answers. The war continues in part because we've allowed it to become invisible. The details are complicated, the consequences are distant, or so we've been led to believe. But the result is clear. Rising instability, mounting civilian suffering, and a steady erosion of international norms. All while we scroll past, numbed by constant distraction, unaware that what's being decided in these shadow wars has everything to do with the kind of world we're leaving for the next generation. Because when we choose not to look, the war has already won.